One is, does it make it easier or harder to live, work, and play in Boulder? Number two is, does it promote racial equity and social justice? And number three is, does it address the climate emergency?
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 12, I sat down with Dan Williams in his backyard to talk about his candidacy for Boulder City Council. This fall, the City of Boulder will be electing 5 representatives to City Council. Boulder Coalition, a consortium of several progressive organizations including Open Boulder, Boulder Progressives, and United Campus Workers Colorado, have endorsed 4 candidates, including Dan, Nicole Speer, Matt Benjamin, and Lauren Folkerts. Dan's campaign is gearing up for a busy election season. He has qualified for the city election matching funds and has boxes of yard signs and campaign stickers in his garage. Despite the swirl of new activity in his life, he made time to sit down for a long conversation to discuss his values and what he hopes to accomplish on City Council. I appreciate the calm and thoughtful way that he discusses the issues without trying to soften or downplay the urgency of the problems we face. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Dan Williams. Dan, thank you so much for coming on Sharing Boulder. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me and David. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I moved to Boulder about 15 years ago. I'd been in Washington, D.C. for a while, first doing public policy work at the federal government, and then I became a lawyer. I had kids at the time who were 5 and 7. I was sort of working all the time at a D.C. law firm, and just knew I had to get out and be somewhere where I could enjoy nature, enjoy raising my kids, and just have a nicer life. And looked around at a few different places and really fell in love with Colorado and with Boulder, so nice. I settled here.
So you actually just sort of like looked on the map, you've been around, and you kind of thought this place would work for me.
I did. I had friends from law school, so I went to Georgetown, and people from there ended up sort of all over, and yeah. I looked around and talked with people about where it would be fun to live and where I could practice law and have a much more balanced lifestyle, and this rose pretty quickly to the top.
That's so cool to have such a deliberate approach to ending up where you went.
Yeah.
Because I'm sort of here by accident, but anyways. So what do you do career-wise right now?
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer at a law firm in town called Hutchinson Black & Cook. I'm a litigator, so I work on cases that are either heading towards trial or in trial, or so basically disputes.
Okay.
I do a broad range of cases. So I do civil rights cases, I do cases for victims of sexual assault, Title IX cases, and I also do commercial and business cases. So either businesses suing each other or individuals suing businesses, that sort of thing.
So I happen to know about at least 2 cases you've litigated. One was the Bedrooms Are for People fiasco last fall, and the other was a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Is that right?
Yeah.
No,
I'm sorry, of Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, I'm sorry, Harvey Weinstein.
It's like, which victim? Okay. Right. So which there's such different cases.
No, I know. It's like it's not really a nice segue, I guess. But yeah, maybe just. But go ahead and just tell us
about
let's talk
about the Bedrooms case. So that I had signed their petition early on in the summer. It was during COVID, and someone biked up to my house with a clipboard and talked with me about it from 6 feet away and handed me a sterile pen. I really thought it was great what Bedrooms was trying to do. I got a phone call in late July from one of the Bedrooms organizers telling me something I just thought couldn't be right, which is the city had told them they needed to get a certain number of signatures by mid-August, and then in July they were told, actually, no, you needed to get those signatures in June. So they were right on track, doing what they'd been instructed to do, but then the city said, no, you actually had to submit your petition previously. And that just seemed crazy. It seemed like something out of a Kafka novel. So I was like, all right, I'll help you out. I'll take your case. So we ended up filing a lawsuit against the city, and it was a tough issue for the court, which is whether if a city administrator gets the law wrong, can the city be held to the promise it made? And there was no question that the city had made the promise or that they got it wrong. The only question is whether they'd be held responsible for what they'd done. And the judge said he didn't have the authority to do that.
The district judge.
The district judge,
Yeah.
right. So we took it up to the Supreme Court, and they initially said they'd hear the case, and we wrote up all the papers and got it ready for them. And then I think they looked at it and decided it was just too complicated to do right before the election and didn't take the case. So as it worked out, bedrooms was not on the ballot in 2020. I'm pleased to see they're back on the ballot for 2021, and I think that's going to be a big issue.
Cool. Well, I'm a big supporter of Bedrooms Are for People. I volunteer and helped with the petition campaign this summer. And so really appreciate the hard work that you did to help last year, even though it was sort of for naught. But
right.
I think in a lot of ways it's raised awareness of how important the issue is and how people are resisting it, right? I assume there's something about the city council mechanics that I don't know, it just suggests like they really didn't want this on the ballot. And so, I mean, they probably could have been flexible with the organizers, but weren't.
No, they could have. I mean, it's interesting. The city attorney at the time actually asked that the city council just put it on the ballot because they got the support that the clerk told them to get. They submitted their signatures by the August deadline, and the council had the authority to put it on the ballot. And basically, the city attorney said, look, this is the right thing to do. We should own up to our word. We should do what we said we would do. And the council still didn't do it.
So did that event have any effect on you being interested in running for city council?
Yeah, it's a good question. I hadn't paid that much attention to city council until watching what happened with bedrooms and seeing just how unfairly people were treated. And I started watching a lot more closely after that. And yeah, that is that was one of several things that factored in. But I mean, the other is we're at really a critical juncture for Boulder. I mean, the city has changed a lot, and the way it's changed is it's gotten wealthier and more exclusive and harder for people even to do what I did 15 years ago, move here with a young family, stretch, get a mortgage, get a house, and make this home. And I think there's still time to reverse that. I think if we take some bold action now, we can make Boulder a place for all of us. But it's going to take some intentionality and some work.
Well, do you want to circle back to the other Harvey Weinstein case, or do you want to dive into housing?
No, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah,
so
okay.
The Harvey Weinstein case was interesting. We were representing someone who had been part of a class action lawsuit, a woman who had been victimized by Harvey Weinstein years ago. And she felt that the lawyers handling the class action weren't looking out for the victims. And what she wanted to do was go to the judge and say, this case should not move forward as a class action. I should get to press my own case because I need counsel who really cares about me. So me and one of my partners, John Clune, took her case.
The lawyers were perhaps just trying to maximize the amount of payout or something like that and kind of gloss over things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most sort of optimistic way to look at it is they were doing what they thought would be best for the whole group, but also yield themselves a big payout, and they weren't as focused on the individual client. And my philosophy to lawyering is much more focusing on what each client needs and wants, and I give my advice, but ultimately it's their choice.
Yeah. Well, so what did you learn from that experience?
In terms of the client, I mean, our client was just a wonderful person. One thing that really struck me is her experience with Weinstein had happened decades ago, and it had a profound influence on her life, decades later. And seeing that the harm that's caused by sexual assault, seeing how it can dominate someone's life for so many years after the fact was just really moving to appreciate, and
Yeah.
it makes me feel grateful for the opportunity to help someone like that, because if I can try to restore a bit of balance through the legal system, I want to be able to do that for people.
Thank you for tackling that. That's an interesting story. Any other litigation stories you want to tell before we move into sort of like city politics?
Oh, let's jump into city
Yeah,
issues.
sure.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
plenty of legal war stories
Yeah.
I could tell after doing it for 20 years,
Of
but
course.
yeah,
Of
I fear
course.
I'll bore
Cool.
your audience.
Well, yeah. So I mean, front and center for me is always housing. So maybe if you could just sort of articulate a positive vision for what Boulder could do to improve access to housing.
Right. So, I mean, I was saying before, I mean, the problem that I see is people are being shut out, that um, people who got here early, got in, they've seen huge appreciation in their property values, and the next generations are being excluded. And that, for me, means, among other things, my own kids who are 20 and 22 and, really wouldn't have a place here. And even if they could get back here, there wouldn't be a strong peer group for them of people who
Yeah.
were going and doing interesting and creative projects as young adults in Boulder. So what do we do about it? I think there are really sort of two sides to the coin. One is to make the best use of the properties that we have in Boulder. So look, 85% of Boulder is single family houses. So in 85% of Boulder, you can't have a duplex, you can't have a triplex. And then we have these occupancy limits, which mean only three unrelated people can live in a house, whether it's 2,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet.
I just always like to say when people describe it, that's crazy.
Right,
Like,
and I think people who aren't from Boulder and hear
yeah,
about this, I mean, they're shocked.
really, it's
There
like
are,
it's
yeah,
totally wild.
yeah. Uh, so in terms of making the most of what we have, bedrooms are for people. It's important for
Yeah,
that to pass this year. I mean, that's the lowest of low-hanging fruit
it's
in
step
housing
one.
opportunities.
Yep.
These are bedrooms that are being heated. These are bedrooms that already exist. If you think about the climate crisis and the need to live more efficiently, adding a fourth or fifth person to a house is the easiest way to make per person carbon emissions go down. So bedrooms. The other sorts of things we can do with our current housing stock are things like uh, ADUs. So these are,
Acce-
granny flats or
accessory dwelling units,
right,
ADUs.
exactly. So we can liberalize the rules for ADUs.
Yeah.
There was some effort a few years ago on council to do this. There were a lot of compromises made that still made it extremely hard to have an accessory dwelling unit. So in other words, to allow someone else to have an apartment in your house or in a small house in your backyard that you build out, or someone who could live on the top floor of a garage. Again, low hanging fruit definitely makes sense from a climate emergency perspective. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing that. And then, go ahead.
Have you ever brought your kids back here and said, hey, young adults, there's some extra space back here. You thought about, like sketch out a possible ADU in the back?
So what we sketched out for the backyard behind me was a foam pit that never fully got built, but what they wanted to do was ride their bikes and skateboards off this ledge and
Yeah.
jump into it. So they started the trenching work
Uh-huh.
that got about, an afternoon in of trenching
They were like,
and
this is
then
hard.
abandoned ship. So we couldn't get the foam pit to work. Yeah, I'm skeptical that
Okay.
the boys are going to build an ADU back here, but maybe someday.
Priorities change as you grow
Right.
older,
They've
though.
gotten a little older
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
so
Cool.
yeah.
Um, well, so one of the big complaint about higher occupancy and more efficient use of housing is currently available housing is the cars. What do we do about the cars?
Right.
That's one, I guess. There's also some arguments about investors coming in and swooping in and dormifying Boulder, which I don't know if we want to go into that or not. It's such a vacuous argument in my perspective, but we can.
Let's start with that one, and
Yeah.
then let's talk
Okay.
about the cars.
Yeah.
The cars, I mean, I think there is something legitimate that there may well
Yeah.
be more cars. On the investor theory, this is something that I think has been made up by people who are living now in fancy
Yeah.
houses that have appreciated a lot. And I don't think there's evidence to support that. And I was
Yeah.
actually having lunch with someone today who was telling me, bought his house decades ago. It's on the hill. He said it just assessed at $3 million. He
Yeah.
has a big, beautiful house on the hill. And the thought that an investor would say, the way I'm going to make money on a $3 million house is buy that and have 8 college students live in it
Yeah.
is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally.
that's not a smart real estate move. Uh, the smart real estate move is to buy houses that need some work, fix them up, and flip them and sell them as single family houses. There is not evidence that people are buying these now extremely fancy single family houses on the hill and flipping them to pack them with college
Yeah.
students who, if anything, would lower the property
I
values.
think that's a very compelling argument. I think a nice corollary to that is the implied assumption that somehow these occupancy restrictions have somehow stagnated housing prices or suppressed them in the years that they've been in place, which to me is also like patently absurd.
Right. I mean, we've tried something and we have a result, and the question is, do we like the result we have?
Yeah.
And the result pretty clearly doesn't work
Yep.
based on the housing crisis the city currently has. But the second issue, the parking,
For sure.
there are trade-offs that we have to make. So if we take the climate emergency seriously, one thing that means is that in urban areas like Boulder, we need to have more people living there. And that will mean there are more cars. And the question is, are we willing to trade off not always having an empty parking spot in front of our house in exchange for allowing a 20 something or a 30 something that's just getting their life going and
Yeah.
um, getting their feet wet or doing something creative in town or working as a teacher? Do we want to have a place for them to live? And if we do, it may mean that we have to walk a little further, and really not that much further. We were talking about half a block further to park. So that's a trade-off. It's a trade-off I'm willing to make. It's a trade-off. The other thing we get, the benefit that we get, isn't it's not entirely altruistic. It is altruistic, but the other benefit is that we have a richer community, but not in the dollar sense. We have a community with different kinds of people, with people who are musicians and artists and people who enliven our spaces. So yes, uh, I think if we're being honest about it, it will lead to more cars, and it may mean that we can't always park directly in front of our homes. But the question is, what does it add to a neighborhood to have more people? And in my view, it's worth it.
Well, I appreciate that response, and I will say when I first logged on to the Bedrooms Are for People website, that was my first reaction was, yeah, but what about the cars? And I guess I just would just encourage you as if when you get elected to city council, to say, if parking is a problem, let's do some policy tweaks and imagination around how we can, improve parking situations. Or, I mean, I feel like if we are serious about climate change, a lot more of us need to get out of our cars and like sell them and trade them in for e-bikes or walk, live in 15-minute neighborhoods. And so, I mean, like the trend I would love to see is as we increase the number of people, we actually reduce the number of cars. And I think there's ways of making it more expensive or maybe less convenient or lots of possibilities there. So
Well, I mean, one natural effect of having more people is it actually makes alternatives more viable. So by
yeah,
that, I mean, they've done studies about how many people have to live in a neighborhood for the neighborhood to support a thriving coffee shop or a
yeah,
little grocery store or
yeah,
somewhere where you can and would want to walk to.
yep,
You need some amount of critical mass to make
yeah,
that work, and the same is true with public transit. So for people to get out of their cars and take the bus, we need public transit that's frequent and cheap. And the only way to do that is to have enough people to make that
worthwhile.
workable. So I
Yeah,
mean, in some ways, these things really do go together.
for sure, for sure. Cool. Well, so let's see. You talked about using better, making better use of the housing that we have now.
Yeah,
What
right.
else? What else do you have?
No, look, and then the other side of that is building new places for people to live.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the National Sierra Club has said the single most important thing we can do for the environment is careful infill development. So, in other words, looking at empty lots in urban areas and building multifamily housing there. So multifamily housing can mean things like duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. Uh, we have plenty of space in Boulder where we can build more, but the problem is our current planning processes take years to a decade to build anything. So you look at a place like Alpine Balsam, okay,
Yeah.
and then the city bought the hospital in 2015, and we are nowhere near allowing anyone to live there. And if we get this done to the end of this decade and families move in, that'll be impressive
I
under
would
the
just say,
city scales.
despite all the cool schematas I've seen where you walk through
Right.
the neighborhood, it looks awesome. I'm ready to, sign me up, But
See, okay, I agree. It looks great. And the thing is, like, if we had built in 2015, a baby could have been born and grown up before
they'd
actually
be off
any
to
shovel
kindergarten
will
this fall.
ever,
Yeah.
right, before any shovel will hit the dirt. And to me, that's tragic. I mean, I think when I talk about Boulder being for all of us, I'm talking about not just thinking about the people who are here. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the people we've shut out. And
Yeah.
today, we are shutting people out of Alpine Balsam by not having built that out 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Today, we're shutting people out of the old People's Clinic building at the corner of Iris and Broadway, where there was a proposal to build there, and it got shut down. And that's families that could have lived there and raised kids there and had great lives and thrived in Boulder.
Yeah.
And so we need to look at the opportunity cost of spending a decade to approve a development project. We can do a lot better, and it would make a big difference.
Well, I appreciate the way you frame that because a lot of people go straight to what I think is a red herring, which is like the height limits. Oh, well, we'll always argue about the height limits, and it's like, no, you don't go from like 85% single family housing straight to like 55-foot buildings everywhere.
Right.
I mean, sure, you could perhaps have some really dense housing right downtown that would be affected by a 55-foot height limit. But to me, that's not really the solution. Like the solution is like about infill all over the city.
I agree. I mean, no one is proposing that. No one's proposing getting rid of the height limits, and there's no need to. We're just
Yeah.
not at a point where that's a conversation. I heard someone say the other day, oh, if you want to allow more people to live in Boulder, we'd have to build out our open space. I mean, that's ridiculous. We don't.
Also,
I
yeah,
wouldn't
totally
support
not true.
that. And there's no need. There are plenty of spaces. As you say, when 85% of the city is zoned for single-family houses, there's room to do more on the lots that we have.
Do you have any thoughts about asphalt and how much there is in this city?
I do. It's interesting. I've been seeing pictures of cities in Europe, including Paris, where there's an effort to reclaim public space. So my office is at Ninth and Walnut, and
Nice.
I saw Pearl Street get closed between Ninth and 11th, and I saw how happy people are in the evenings strolling up and down that street. I mean, we have created out of necessity from COVID, we've just created a thriving public space. I heard this week city council and city staff were talking about when that should end, and I don't see why it should end. I think what we could do is rip up some of the asphalt, extend the mall that way, and just recognize we stumbled into something great on that space. There's space on the hill that's similar. There's a block that's closed off there with restaurants where, again, people enjoy having walkable space. So the mall was built decades ago, and thank you to the people who did that. This generation now has an opportunity to double or triple that size for closed streets, very quickly based on our COVID experience.
Yeah, I can imagine an entire pedestrian districts downtown where cars are sort of relegated to the fringes.
Well,
But
yeah, I mean, just on that, and I mean, interrupt, but it's downtown's small,
yeah,
so we're not talking about people having to walk terribly far. I can imagine that too. And it would be just a joy. The same way people are happy when they go to the Pearl Street Mall, they could be happy walking on the blocks around there. And
That's
the
right.
truth is, no one likes driving there anyway.
No,
It's just a pain.
it's
It's just difficult.
actually way easier to bike downtown.
Exactly. But you
Yeah,
know what? There's not downtown is a great street to bike east-west. You
true.
know, because I bike downtown a lot, and
Yeah,
it's a little scary whether you're on Spruce or Pine. Walnut's one way, the other
yeah.
way. It's not terrible, but it's let's call it somewhat frightening. So, you know, there's the Boulder Creek path that's all the way on the far side of Canyon. But no, we actually could use some bikeways downtown too.
Definitely, definitely. Cool. Well, do you have any more thoughts about housing? Uh,
I mean, I think those are the big
yeah,
picture goals.
yeah, great. Um, so that's kind of a nice segue into maybe let's just sort of close the loop on transportation a
Yeah,
bit
for
more.
sure.
Yeah. So give us a positive vision for
Yeah.
what you would what you'd like Boulder to do about transportation.
Yeah, and I'm glad we started with housing because, like I said, with more people living a little closer together, I'm not talking skyscrapers, but just moderate improvements there, it makes public transit much more viable
Yeah.
for our city. And I think we need a bus network that's fast and inexpensive. So, you know, I lived in Washington, D.C. It has a great public transit network. I lived in Philadelphia, that's where I
Yeah.
grew up. You know, great public transit network. And it's great because it doesn't take much more time to take the bus or there to take the subway than it does to drive and park. Uh, for Boulder, we need that, and we're nowhere near that. So actually, frankly, when I moved here, my wife and I had owned one car for years, and when I moved here, it just seemed unworkable
Yeah.
to just have one car. I think now, you know, we're rethinking how we're living. My wife just got an e-bike. I was saying, you know, I'm looking at getting an e-bike. So I
Very
think
cool.
maybe it's possible, but we need to make it easy for people, and
Yeah.
that means transit. It also means our bike infrastructure needs to get a lot better. So, you know, Boulder's bike paths are really wonderful. I
Yep.
mean, they're fun to bike on, they're efficient, but we also need bike lanes on streets. And the thing right now is it's frightening for a lot of people to bike on streets. And that's because we don't have protected bike lanes. So there seem like some pretty clear candidates like 19th Street and 30th Street and Arapahoe and Pearl heading east, where protected bike lanes would make a
My
huge
personal
difference.
favorite would be Table Mesa.
Right. Okay.
I'm always deciding whether to cut straight through on Table Mesa and save a few minutes, or go down to the Bear Creek bike path.
No, and that's right. And you're someone who's confident on a bike, right? Like,
But
when
yeah,
we talk about someone who's more of an occasional rider or who has
yeah,
children with them,
yeah,
we want those people to feel safe. So you need protected bike lanes to make that work. So this summer, we've seen just a heartbreaking number of bike fatalities in the Boulder area, and a lot of that's not in the city; it's around the city. But each one of those is like a dagger,
yeah.
and we can and should do better.
Well, and it adds to the risk calculation of am I gonna increase the amount of biking I do to go places, um, or am I afraid of all the big trucks
Right.
and drivers on the road?
No, so my wife works in Longmont for Boulder County
Okay.
Public Health. She has an e-bike. She loves to e-bike to work, but right now there's not a great way
No.
to get there. And you can bike on the diagonal, but it's not fun biking on what's essentially
It's
a
oppressive.
freeway.
I've done it quite a
Right.
number of times.
And, there is this plan that's not funded to build a bike path, uh, mostly I think in the middle of the diagonal, and
Hmm.
that would make a huge difference. And that's something the city should be advocating for. I'll tell you, the traffic into town from Longmont has gotten really terrible, both on the diagonal and then coming down North Broadway.
Is that true? Like right now this month, and I work from home, so I don't really pay attention to the traffic coming in and
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, the traffic's back. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
there was a time during COVID when it wasn't, but yeah, no, the traffic is rough. Um, I hear my wife talks about it because she's driving out of town, so she's essentially reverse commuting.
Yeah.
But yeah, and making that making that a viable bikeway for people that's direct. It's not that far, and particularly with e-bikes,
Yep.
it's an easy ride.
That's right. Cool. Oh, what I wanted to say is that, I think, and this kind of ties in together, like bedrooms are for people and the housing things that you mentioned and transportation. And that is, I think there's actually a market for young people to move into town without a car. Like, I know personally a bunch of people that don't have a car and live in town
Right.
and can do everything they need to with their bike or just walking. And I think people who are serious about climate change are really looking for that. Like, and so, and I'm looking. I'm actually looking for that.
Right.
We own one. My family, we own one car, and I bike everywhere. And well, my wife and kids, they also bike everywhere. But we do have a car and we
Right.
use it frequently. But like thinking about what kind of housing we want in the future, or just the demographic I just mentioned. Um, I think we ought to really anticipate the people who are serious about climate change and
Right.
don't, and want to have housing options that don't require them to have a car.
Well, I think you raise a great issue. So, a few thoughts about it. One is the climate benefits, and the other is the economic benefits of not having a car. So it's just a lot less expensive. So if you want to make Boulder work for you and you're not super wealthy, not having a car is a good strategy. You know, when we were talking about housing, one thing we didn't talk about are restrictions or rules like parking minimums. And I think a lot of people don't understand how this works. So if you're going to build multifamily housing in Boulder, Boulder requires you to have a certain number of parking spaces per bedroom.
Yeah.
Boulder, which says that we want to be a leader on climate.
Yeah.
We insist that you build parking spots for cars if you want to build bedrooms for people. And that's crazy because there are people who want to live in communities with no cars or fewer cars. And water view. So there was a development that actually just got approved on Arapahoe,
Mm-hmm.
um, on East Arapahoe, and the developer said, we're designing this for people who don't want to have a car lifestyle. I
They want
mean,
to jump on the jump and they want to bike on the bikeway.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the city insisted they build a parking structure,
Mm.
which they're doing, but the architects were clever enough to design it so that if the city ever changes its rules, they can deconstruct that parking deck
Okay.
and put additional housing there. So
That is,
I
that
thought
is
that was
good.
forward thinking, but yeah.
Well, a couple thoughts that come to mind when you say that is one issue is just the extreme cost of a per parking spot, especially if we're going to build infill. That means we're not going to have giant driveways in front of the multifamily,
Right.
infill projects that we do. A lot of those, if you're going to have parking requirements, parking minimums, they're going to have to go underground, and the cost of underground parking is really astronomical. I've heard like quotes of like 50,000 per spot, which
Yeah.
like if you just think about the cost of if you want to have modestly priced condos on the market,
Right.
adding $50,000 to a modestly priced condo is like that's a huge expense that someone has to pay, and it's it yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I guess having grown up on the East Coast in a city that was built, a lot of it was built in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then living in Washington that really sort of grew up in the 20s and 30s and 40s, living in neighborhoods that were designed for people to walk, it is great. I mean, where people have front porches and the design of the house is to have you near the sidewalk so you can see and interact with your neighbors. That's a really nice way to live, and it is a little less convenient for your car, but again, there's a trade-off there. You can build great neighborhoods without cars. And I'm not saying every new development shouldn't be designed to allow cars. If people want to live somewhere where they want to be able to drive their car and park in a parking deck right by where they live, there's going to be a market for that, and they should. But the question to me is, should the city of Boulder require every new development to have a $50,000 or whatever it costs parking space associated
Yeah,
with it?
yeah.
And I don't see why we don't allow people to pay less and live in a neighborhood where they don't have to have a
Definitely.
car.
I heard about the property at the flower shop there by the Peloton, Freuhof's was
Right.
the name of the shop,
Yeah.
and there's a senior living development going in there that's parking restricted, and it's going to have a car share, and I'm just really excited that sort of those sort of ideas are being promoted. But I'd love to see a lot more of those around the city where, a spot that I always think about because I live in South Boulder is Baseland and Broadway, where
Hmm.
you could build a bunch of housing and just have a pilot where you said, this is going to be car light living housing. There's going to be car shares, and it's going to be for the kind of demographic. Well, it doesn't. We don't have to target any
Right.
demographic, but
No.
the younger person perhaps. Sorry, that's that's sort of beside the point. There are people, there are people who want to live in a car light lifestyle,
Right.
and so we ought to have options for those folks.
Right. And it may be true. It's easier for people to do that who aren't shuttling kids around to after school sports and things that I did for years and years. A lot of those people can also shuttle their kids, on e-bikes, and there are other ways to do it. But the fact of the matter is, actually, as younger generations are having fewer and fewer kids, designing thriving places and communities that really aren't centered around a suburban lifestyle with, everyone driving their own cars
Yep.
and parents feeling the need to drive all the time makes sense.
Well, I'll just say this, and that is, I have a friend who lives near me who puts his kids in a minivan, drives to the local school, then drives downtown, parks in a parking structure, and I hop on my bike with kids on the back and do the same thing. And like, uh, I just would never trade my commute for his commute. Like,
Right.
and really like we had to really just sort of lean into the need for. It's not just better for the climate. It's like it's pro-social and it's better for your mental health, and it's easy on the finances. Like parking downtown with a bicycle is not expensive.
No, it's funny. I mean, yeah, I think it's hard for people to break habits, but
Yeah.
I think when they do, people are often happy. So, Boulder's an interesting town. We have all these athletes who are getting up in the morning and doing something hard.
Yeah.
Get up at 5 in the morning and go for a run, or go work out. And people are good about that in town. And even though there's a little pain involved in that, I think everyone would say, yeah, that makes my life more fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I find when I'm biking to work a lot, I have that feeling. I just enjoy that. Even my bike ride down to my office from here is 10, 15 minutes, but just having that 10 or 15 minutes whizzing through town on my
You
bike,
notice things,
yeah, it
for one.
makes my
Yeah.
day more bright. And if I'm in a rut and I'm driving, I don't get that. So I hear what you're saying, that sort of giving people a bit of a push to step out of their normal routine and try these things, I think actually, would make their lives better, as well as, it's necessary for the climate emergency,
Yeah.
you know, as well as it makes things more affordable.
I have one more sort of, this is kind of a digression, but it connects. And that is, you were talking about how lovely it is to live in a city that's, walkable, in a neighborhood that's walkable. And one of the connections that makes for me is we live in a college town where CU Boulder, the main campus, is just the most pedestrian-friendly district in town that you can imagine. And we tell kids, undergraduates, we give them this special place to spend 4 years walking around everywhere, biking and skating, skateboarding, and then we tell you, oh, sorry, the rest of the city is not like this, and in fact, because it's not, you can't afford to live here. Go somewhere else.
Right.
And but I think a lot of people that have gone to like a 4-year liberal arts college, maybe one of the reasons they loved it, if they did, is because it was like the one time in their life where they actually just like lived in a walkable atmosphere where you could
Right.
just run into people and like have all the serendipity that's involved with being in compact neighborhood.
Well, and lived with friends.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Dorm living is fun. And then when kids are a little older and they live with two, three, four, five of their friends,
Yep.
that's a great way to live. And when I was in my 20s, I was in Washington, D.C. and lived in group houses.
Yep.
And it was legal there. We had no occupancy limits. It didn't seem to wreck the town. And it was, I wouldn't have traded it for the world. I mean, it was the sort of centerpiece of my social life at the time. And yeah, I don't know why we're so afraid to give that opportunity to people here.
Yeah. One more thought. I'm sorry, I should be
Yeah.
asking the questions, but when I think about an ADU going in or a single family home turning into a duplex and or alpine balsam, and when you create those new housing opportunities, um, that the effect on the climate is not just about getting people closer um, to town, but it's also like uh, that buyer of that house. What do they buy if they don't have the new construction to buy? Well, they sometimes they drive out to the suburbs
Yeah.
on the fringes where we're still expanding rapidly, like there's no end to the space we can occupy. And I feel like one thing that Boulder's done really well is constrain sprawl
Right.
in a limited way, at least kind of in a very local way is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
We've exacerbated it in places like Erie and Louisville and surrounding other suburbs. Um, but I think we all have this value that like we shouldn't be sprawling out anymore,
Right.
and that relates to how we like do housing here in Boulder.
Right. And when we think about who we are as a Boulder and we ignore the large numbers of people commuting in from Weld County and Larimer County, we're ignoring the effect that we're having on
Yeah.
our little corner of the world here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the 60,000 in commuters are spending, a third or a half of their day in Boulder. They are part of our community. And the only question is whether we all want to require them to, spend an hour and a half a day driving back and forth to Weld County or Greeley or
Yeah.
Erie or other places. And, I don't. I want to find more ways for more people to live here. And I think we can do so in a way that, maybe it'll somewhat change the character of our neighborhoods, but I think it'll be a change for the better.
Well, if we can move towards less car-dominated neighborhoods that are more walkable and bike-friendly, then I think the trade-off of having more people, it's actually really nice.
Agreed.
So,
When I bought my house, one of the first things we did was there was no pathway from the sidewalk to my front door. It was just unbelievable. But the house was built in the late 80s, and that's how
so
they
the
did it.
expectations you drive in
Yeah,
and shut the door
exactly.
behind you, and
And several other neighbors have done it too. And this is a neighborhood where I am, where the neighbors know each other and like each other and talk to each other. But it required intentionality.
yeah,
It required us to do little things like changing our walkways, and then to do things like eh, work at it, focus on it. One of
yeah,
our neighbors has a movie night once a week, and
nice,
we make it a point to swing by so we know each other, and it makes our community that much more vibrant.
cool. Well, I think that's a nice way to close off the housing section. I know we also wanted to talk about uh, various issues around equity and diversity and uh, policing
Yeah.
and related issues. So, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, you know, my professional work as a lawyer, one of the things I have focused on is civil rights litigation, and uh, cases where that includes cases involving police misconduct. And Boulder is not immune from that. I mean, we have the Zayed Atkinson case. It was just an easy example where this was a college student at Naropa who's black, who was cleaning up trash. He was trash in front of his apartment building. It was his job, was to do a little maintenance work at his apartment building, and he was sitting on a wall with one of those trash pickers, and a police officer just thought he didn't belong and started questioning him and demanding that he provide ID, and he got upset about it. He said, "Why am I being singled out?" And it was obvious why, because he was African American. And next thing you knew, there were, I think, about half a dozen cops there. It escalates, and they're pointing their guns at him, and you see the pain that Mr. Atkinson went through. That's not a police force that's respecting people's civil rights. That's not a police force that looks different from the police force in the cities that we think of as much more conservative cities on the Front Range. So I think the Boulder Police Department has a lot of reforming to do. One thing that's interesting that I saw today about our police department is they're having a hard time filling jobs, and in fact, they're losing officers. And one of the reasons I think that's happening is we're asking our police to do the wrong things. So, when someone goes to the police academy, they want to make a difference for their community, and they want to do it by fighting crime. And when we're asking police to fight property crime, bike thefts, car break-ins, that's what they're excited to do, and that's what we want them to do. And when we're asking them to prevent and solve violent crime and crimes against people, that's what they want to do. They want to make us safer. But what we're doing here in Boulder is we're also asking the police to solve social services problems. We're asking them to spend a huge amount of time citing people for minor violations if they're unhoused. And that is not what excites a police officer to get up in the morning and do their job. And frankly, it's not what they're good at. Social workers are good at doing social work. Police officers are good at dealing with property crime and crimes against people. And I think if we took some stuff off the police's plate and used social workers for social problems, we'd have more success in terms of managing the social problems, and we'd have a happier police force and a more balanced police force that's focused on what they need to be doing.
That's great. I was listening to a radio program by KGNU called Black Talk, which had an episode on this issue with mental health and the difficulty of some of these scenarios where the police kind of come in as military ops, and it can only escalate if there's not complete compliance, which is difficult when someone's having a psychotic episode, and so
right. I was talking to a mom whose son is mentally ill, and we were talking about what happens when the police are stopping people excessively, because she says her son will run. As much as she tries to explain to him not to, that's what he's going to do. And people get shot running from the police. They get tased running from the police. They get tackled. And, there's a different way to interact with mentally ill people that social workers are trained to do. And, the thing about Boulder is we talk about Boulder as such a progressive, liberal place. But we don't have to invent these solutions on our own, because actually other cities are leap years ahead of us doing this sort of thing. And it's time for us just to start looking at best practices. So we have a new city manager in Boulder who actually has worked in other places that are using more progressive policing strategies, and understanding that we can limit police's role to crime fighting and have social workers do social work. And one thing I think City Council can do is listen to the really good staff that have been hired in the last few years, because I think we can make these changes. I think we can get there, but we need a City Council that's going to empower these changes. And maybe I'm going a bit beyond your question, but that's why I'm running. This is a moment when we can make that difference, and I'm excited to go try to do it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ironic, or not ironic. It kind of gives me hope that we actually have a city staff that seems to be kind of out in front of City Council. Like City Council seems to be like, hey, hold your horses, and getting in the way.
Right.
And so I'm excited about the possibility of electing a slate of progressive candidates, and sort of just being, and then you guys could turn around and be like, go do your work, do it well.
Right. On racial equity, the staff put together a really thoughtful analysis of the problems in Boulder, and one of the things they identified was that our housing policies have made uh, racial inequity more pronounced. That we actually have a set of, having 85% of the city zone single family housing, and frankly having the greenbelt around the city has made Boulder the exclusive enclave that it is. And that's not to say we need to go build out the open space. We should not do that. But we should recognize the problem. And when the city staff say, we've studied this, and whether people had good intentions or bad intentions, this is the effect of it. That's something that I want to have a city council that listens to that.
So is that a report that they gave to city council, or
Yeah.
is that embodied in the, like when you
Yeah.
described that, I was thinking, oh, that sounds like the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan.
This is
But
in
that's
the
something
yeah.
else.
No, that is something else. This is in the city. The staff did a draft racial equity plan, and
Okay.
my understanding was the council was concerned about some of the language that is very specific about our housing policies that have led to racial exclusion in Boulder. And one of the things the staff pointed out, which I've found in my own studies about the history of Boulder, is our exclusionary living practices here are intentional. We didn't just end up this way accidentally. So in the 10s and 20s and 30s, when the Klan had a huge presence here, there was a decision made to exclude undesirables, as they were called at the time. And that was done by keeping industry out of Boulder, which has been relatively successful at eliminating industry from town, and having large single-family lots. And that's persisted.
It's like this living legacy that
Right.
that is just all around us, and it's had intended consequences. I think that's the phrase I like to use when people say, oh, these other policies will have unintended consequences.
Right.
Well, gosh, we're looking at a situation where there's lots of intended consequences that have built up over the decades.
Right, and I think people, some people bristle at that because they say, well, if I like the way my neighborhood is zoned, are you calling me a racist?
Right.
And I mean, I'm not, but I do think we need to recognize how we got where we are. And I do think we need to say, if we want something different, we're going to have to make some changes. There are some trade-offs here. And
Yeah.
we're living in a community that is, racially exclusive and has excluded black people and Latina people and Native people. And if we want to change that, we're going to have to change some things that maybe are a little uncomfortable for us. And that's a decision we're making today.
Yeah, I don't want to give a pass to people who want to say they're not racist in the scenario you just described in the following way, like if you don't feel like you have racism in your heart, good for you. I hope that I want to live in a community where people feel like they're open to lots of different kinds of people being in their orbit of friends and workplace and whatnot. But I think it's kind of the white fragility response to be tone deaf to the racist structures that we live in, and I just it's not to me, it's not a complete accident that it's 85% single family home zoned and 88% white. I mean, I know they're correlated. It's not a complete if you draw the Venn diagram or whatever, but uh, like we live in the single family home zone comes from a racist uh, design, in the 10s, 20s of the last century, and we never did anything about it. It's all still here, just kind of like it was, and we have said, oh well, anyone can move into this lovely configuration now, but we I don't know. It's like the opportunities that we eliminated from people through things like the GI Bill
Right.
and whatnot. It's just like I just want to always push back a bit, or maybe a lot, to people who say, well, I'm not racist even though I like single family zoning.
Right.
And part of me just wants to say, well, the good news for you is that North America is covered with single-family zoning,
Right.
and
Yeah.
there's so many options for you. But if you're a person of color without a high-paying six-figure salary, and maybe you want to live in a car-light neighborhood, where do you go? I mean, like,
Right.
and if you can't go to Boulder, it's like, I don't know. It's like there's sorry, I'm excited.
No, I see your point. I mean, look, one way to look at racism is there's a conversation that, white people want to have, that racism's what's in my heart.
Yeah.
But the other way to look at racism is what you do, what the consequences are of your actions.
Yeah.
And then we don't really need to talk about what's in your heart. We need to talk about what effects you're causing in the world.
That's right.
And that's where I think understanding our history makes a difference. So after George Floyd was killed in 2020, one of the things I did was I worked with my law firm to set up a series of panel discussions on the history of racial exclusion in Boulder, and I just learned a tremendous amount.
Are those recorded?
We done the first one. It is recorded. The second one
cool.
is going to be in late October, early November.
Well, I'd love to watch it myself and then link to it from the show notes.
No, that would be great. So one of the things I learned is the Black community in Boulder, such as it is, IBM was responsible for bringing a lot of Black families to Boulder. And you don't think of IBM as this leader in progressive anything.
Yeah.
But it made sense when she explained it to me. The person I was talking to is with the NAACP of Boulder County, and she was saying, yeah, I mean, Boulder's a tough place, and you need big employers to build a diverse community. And we have some big employers now in town. And one question I have is, instead of just hating on Google and Apple and the other big tech companies, maybe we could lean on them to make our community better in the ways that IBM did, for a prior generation. Maybe it'll succeed, maybe it'll fail. I think it's certainly worth trying.
I'm not sure I have anything coherent to say about Google and Apple, and my brain sort of goes in 5 directions of that possibility.
But look, I mean, that's the thing, right? We're talking about IBM. IBM was a leader in integrating Boulder. I mean, that's just a shocking fact.
That is interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. So I'm excited to learn more. So tell me what it's called, and how can I participate?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So my law firm, Sessions and Black and Cook. If you Google us and history of racial exclusion, we have online, and it's on YouTube. Our first panel, we did it in conjunction with CU's law school. So I think it may be hosted on the law school's website. And then we started with the history of exclusion of African Americans from Boulder. Next session is going to be, we're going to look at what happened with the Native community.
And is this something that's happening on campus, or it's a Zoom panel?
So the first one was sort of in the heart of COVID shutdowns, so we did it all Zoom. Second one is going to be both in person at the law school and on Zoom.
Cool.
One of the things we found doing it on Zoom was way more people attended than we ever would have guessed. And one of the things that I really loved about it was, I was hoping we would get 50 or 100 people, and we had 700 people sign up for it.
That's so cool.
We had 5 or 6 who tuned in, and it was just an overwhelming interest and response. It made me feel heartened that there's a community here that really cares about these issues. And then we'll do a session on Latina exclusion, and then we're going to do a 4th session talking about the future, the road ahead. So we're doing these slowly. So we did the first one in February, second one later this fall, and then the third one will be over the winter, and 4th one probably be next summer.
Great. So we'll I'll have you give me the details after this. But so I wanted to ask you about the campaign. So how's the campaign going? Congratulations on getting your matching funds.
Thank you.
Maxing out your contributions.
Yeah.
So just tell us a bit about that.
It's been a whirlwind. I mean, I'm not someone who 10 years ago decided I wanted to be on Boulder City Council.
Yeah.
I sort of looked and assessed where the city was and where the opportunities were to have a progressive majority make some changes in town, and decided to jump in kind of late. So, June, May, June, it's been a whirlwind. I
Okay.
mean, I've been learning a tremendous
Yeah.
amount. I've been meeting with a ton of people and talking to people. Um, it's been also just really gratifying to, un, you can lose sight of the fact that there are a lot of people in Boulder who really care about progressive values
Yeah.
and really want to make a
Yeah.
difference. And it's been just really fun to build out a campaign team. With our fundraising, basically the system here is you raise $11,000. You can't get more than $100 per person, and then the city matches it. So then you have a spending cap that's just under $22,000. And raising money wasn't something I thought I'd want to do, but getting on
Turned
the
out to be
phone,
fun, I
yeah,
guess.
right. I
Yeah.
mean, look, I called so many people I hadn't talked to in so long, and it was
Yeah.
just really
Cool.
nice to
So,
reconnect with
so
people.
did you have 11,000 divided by 100, 110 donors? Or did you have a bunch of donors?
We had more than 110. We had maybe 150.
Okay.
I don't have the exact count. So a lot of the donations were in $100
Yeah.
increments, and then
Yeah.
some were 25 or
Yeah.
$50.
I guess it's such a small amount of money that you don't really you can't do the Bernie Sanders thing where you say I
Exactly.
had millions of
But
$5 donors or whatever.
right, I mean, for federal elections, I don't know what the exact limit is, but it's like $2,500 or
Yeah.
something. I mean, it's different when you're raising it in $100
Yeah.
increments. That's like a dinner for two at a Boulder
Yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Well, and I didn't know that the city matched the funds, so you have $22,000
right,
to spend it on.
yeah.
What do you spend it on? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
no,
guess
it's a good
I don't
question
actually know.
because I was asking people, I mean, is that enough? This wasn't something
Yeah.
I'd planned on doing forever, so I didn't
Yeah.
really have a good sense of is that. So, yard signs,
Yep.
apparently that's still important to
Yep.
go print a ton of
Oh, do you have one here?
paper. I do.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm happy
okay.
to give you one.
Is that? I guess
And
that's an implicit
yeah,
endorsement. I'll be
right,
putting his
exactly.
yard sign in
Right.
in my front yard.
We got stickers, which are
Yeah.
super fun, not a huge expense. So you need to print literature.
Yeah.
So there'll be literature put on 35,000 people's, doorsteps or in their door, multifamily. And then advertising
Yeah.
takes money,
Of course.
through the daily camera. So it's not a lot, the
Yeah, it
22,000.
goes quick, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Do you have paid staff on that? I guess it's
No,
all
you couldn't
volunteers. Yeah.
possibly
Yeah.
have
Serious.
paid
Right.
staff. Yeah, so I have a group of volunteers. I have some people younger than me who know how to make social
Who's
media
your
work.
campaign manager?
My wife is doing my campaign
Oh wow.
manager role, so her
Wow.
name's Mary Faltinsky. She she's been just hugely supportive, which has been really
Yeah,
fun.
that makes a lot of sense that she would be supportive if she's
Yeah,
uh, helping you with the campaign.
right.
That's cool.
And then my
Wow.
treasurer is a neighbor who was in did engineering work, is
Okay.
incredibly meticulous. So all the finances are properly being accounted. And then I have a campaign strategist named Liz Marasco, who's done a lot of stuff with
Hmm.
federal elections and statewide elections. And then a guy named Nick Grossman, who's doing social media.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool. I know
so
Nick.
that's the team.
Great. Oh, that's a great team. I think your odds are very good. I guess you won't be doing any professional polling to find out.
Yeah, right.
I guess you
No.
just find out on November 2nd or whenever it is.
Yeah, that's true, but there was a poll early this summer, not about specific candidates, but
Hmm.
about issues in Boulder, and it was interesting. So half of the people in Boulder are renters, half aren't. Um, but in terms of who votes, homeowners vote a lot more than
Yeah.
renters in Boulder. But this survey was interesting. It surveyed registered voters, and it found, like with Bedrooms Are for People, about 75% support.
Wow.
And on progressive issues, it found it progressive issues pulled well here. I mean, it was really heartening. What it said to me is if we can get the voter pool to look more like the composition of Boulder, um, we can have a progressive city council. And really, the game here is getting people out to vote who are infrequent voters. So, vote. It's critical.
Vote. It's
Yeah.
critical. Yeah. I know. I've lived here a long time, and it's taken me a long time to care about local politics and to actually pay enough attention to know who to vote for. And I know that a few times I've just sort of looked at the flyers and went online and played around for 10, 15 minutes and
made my decision based on what people were saying. And one of the problems with that is everyone's kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you're not clued in to what the small variations actually mean when the rubber hits the road,
Right.
that can be difficult to see through. So one thing I really appreciate your candidacy, along with the rest of the folks in the press endorsed by the Progressive Coalition, is that there's just very plain spoken uh, addressing of the issues, and in a way that I feel like wasn't really strong before, like in terms of like leading off with housing and what we need to do differently. And
Right.
I feel like in the past it's always been sort of coded language that says, we're not gonna really talk about single family zoning. We're gonna sort of like
Right. Maybe we'll
use
build in transit
euphemisms or something.
corridors.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's right. I think for years the strategy was don't make waves. Tell people you're a balanced thinker. You consider all sides, which I mean those are important things to
For
be,
sure.
but not really give much on specific issues. And I actually think this year is shaping up to be a different on what to do with unhoused people sleeping by the creek. I mean, there are two very clear philosophies among the candidates. One is my philosophy, and the people on the slate, I think, pretty much as a group. I mean, our belief is that for the last year, Boulder has tried one strategy, which is policing, citing people and clearing camps, and the strategy's failed. The police chief has said we have as many people living outside unhoused today as we had a year ago. And there are a group of candidates who want to double down on that strategy. And they say what we need to do is more sweeps, more money for police. And then the other approach is to say, look, we should not have people sleeping by the creek. I mean, this is where everyone does say the same thing, and everyone agrees that having people living by the creek, having people live in bicycle underpasses is not a good idea. It's not something, but what the four of us who the progressive endorse are saying is, let's look at evidence-based solutions that work. And in this case, there's a nice alignment between what's humane to do and what's actually effective. And the way to get people to not live outside is to give them assisted housing and to open up the shelter to people who have lived in Boulder for less than 6 months, to have day shelter space, to have safe camping, and to have safe parking, so that if you're going to tell someone not to live by the creek, there's somewhere for them to go. That's a very different approach. And I think this issue, more than any, is one where we all agree on the goal, which is don't have people living in our public places. But we have very different strategies to get there. And I think, as I say, ours is based on evidence. Ours looks at what works. It's not just an angry reaction to what's happening. And the other one of, more money for police to do social services. It's failed for the last year, and, I don't think it's going to work moving forward. But we do have 4 or 5 candidates who want to double down on that strategy.
Well, I hope they don't get elected.
Well,
what can I say?
yeah.
I mean, that we had Jen Livovich on the podcast last week, and I learned a lot about homelessness from her. It's not something I've spent a lot of time studying. It's really heartening for me to hear you articulate what sound like effective strategies.
Yeah.
But I don't have much else to add to what you said. It sounds like it seems very sensible to me.
I mean, I've sat down with Jen too, and
Okay.
she's doing something just really moving for our community.
Yeah.
She was homeless. I mean, she
Yeah.
talked about that with you, and she's looking at really effective ways, coming from a place of kindness, that's actually making a huge difference in people's lives. So I was glad to see you interviewed her, and I think the more we talk with people about what she's doing, the better.
Yeah, that's great.
I think we covered a lot.
I think we covered a lot. It's been really enjoyable listening to you.
Yeah.
I have to say, you don't strike me as someone I would imagine seeing waving a flag from the top of a Cadillac in the front of a parade.
Right,
like you
it's
don't
funny.
strike me as a top hat sort
Yeah,
of
right.
politician kind of guy. but I'm really excited about the possibility of you being on city council next year.
I appreciate it.
And do you have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, what I've been telling people about my campaign is, if I'm on city council, I'm going to have three guiding principles for decisions. One is, does it make it easier or harder to live, work, and play in Boulder? Number two is, does it promote racial equity and social justice? And number three is, does it address the climate emergency? Those are the things I want to tackle. It's a lot, but it's doable, and that's going to be my philosophy if I'm on council.
Awesome.
This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by David Adamson and Philip Ogren. Sound and video editing was done by Philip Ogren. The intro music was sampled from Osladum by Gilberto Gil and is available for use under the Creative Commons Sampling Plus license. Please visit us at sharingboulder.us for show notes and previous episodes. If you enjoy this podcast, please support us by sharing this episode with your friends and family. Keep sharing, Boulder.